So, John, we get this question a lot from some of our vSAN customers who were used to building out their infrastructure in a way where they would have these isolated A/B networks for traditional storage. Can that be done with vSAN, and should it be done with vSAN?
So yes, it can, but generally it's not what I would call a normal pattern that people follow. It tends to come from environments who have a long legacy history of working with fiber channel. If you've worked with fiber channel, unlike Ethernet, and say something like NFS, you have, switch A, fabric A, you have switch fabric B, and then you have Gandalf in the middle with his staff saying you shall not cross. Like no frames are ever allowed. We fully isolate these things, and there's kind of almost a deep belief that availability comes from segmentation. And you might even have an entire ops team who only works on the A fabric and one who works on the B fabric, and lots of change control and process between them. This isn't necessarily, I would say, needed for a vSAN network. There are going to be some actual features that aren't supported, like HCI mesh isn't going to be supported. I don't believe you're going to be able to run a stretched cluster with this configuration. In reality, the failover time on a modern VDS, to where if you're doing active standby, is really fast. So per VLAN rapid spanning tree, this stuff's in milliseconds. It's sub-second failover. If you really want to try to increase availability on the networking side, there are some things you can segment within your switching. So don't run stacks. Don't use things like MLAG that require lots of deep connection between both switches. Those tend to have a higher rate of failure on the networking side. If you do want to try to operationally separate, just run two switches and run them, upgrade one first and wait a day, upgrade the other. You can certainly, do that. You could use some type of layer 2 over layer 3 within that underlay to provide some segmentation and prevent spanning tree loops from being a risk. There's a lot of different ways you can increase operationally your leaf spine networks without necessarily having to go to that full air gap.
Okay, so it sounds like it can be done, but not to necessarily introduce some of the practices that you had from an architecture that was fundamentally different in the first place. Sounds like that our failover mechanisms, our method for redundancy there is well established with having full connectivity then between those fabrics. And
yeah, it's not going to deliver like an MPIO style stack. It's you will end up with some VMs binding to vMkernel A, some binding to vMkernel B. And so any given VM's net performance isn't going to be increased. But if you're trying to think about this from like a performance improvement of using more paths, again, not necessarily the default pattern for most people, but an MLAG or a LAG is LACP is going to accomplish that. So I don't think that there's necessarily, this isn't something that's going to improve performance. And I think with a properly configured network, it's not necessarily going to significantly increase availability. It's more, as you say, a legacy operating mode.
Sure.